What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Political Spectrum Podcast, where podcast that collects people with different political beliefs on the political spectrum, gets them together to talk about recent news, politics, etc. Today, we're doing our interview edition. We're interviewing our good buddy Frank here today, who's the conservative on our podcast. Frank, why don't you introduce yourself? Say some words. Whoa, buddy,
not typical.
You cut off.
Yeah,
you cut off a little bit there. Go. So start again.
All right, am I good now?
Yeah.
God damn it, Google Hangouts. All right, well, you said that pretty fast, but I would say I am an Edmund Burke conservative. Let's just go with that. I know Trolley is I don't know what way would I put Trolley in as a conservative. I would call him a very authoritarian conservative or cultural conservative.
Traditional conservative.
I wouldn't say he's traditional.
Well, this is about you, Frank. This isn't about him. So don't worry too
Anyways,
much about it.
I would consider myself a classical liberal conservative. Let's go with that.
Okay, and why don't you define what that is for those out here that don't know what that specific genre of conservative is? Explain to the viewer. What's a conservative in your eyes? Because that's obviously what you label yourself as.
A conservative is like a progressive. They do believe. I'm using the Edmund Burke, who was a philosopher in Great Britain at the time. He wrote about the aftermath of the after the French Revolution, which turned into a total shit show after they got rid of the monarchy, and they brought about vast change. In my view, sees change as a good thing, but in slow paces is change good. You can't have fast change in culture, society, and what have you, because it takes a while to adapt. If you dismantle a government institution such as any one of our branches of government, there's going to be a vast change, or you get rid of the government in total, or the republic, and you replace it with something else, it would be, there's nothing to, so, there's no the culture. So you want to do things slowly.
Right. And you mentioned the branches of government, and basically what our founders did was create a system where things wouldn't change so quickly. So basically following the principles that you follow today. So that's basically how our government's founded, on not radical quick change like fought against, which was definitely proven to be a bad thing in the French Revolution, but slow change.
Slow change. Time. I mean, the country can be changed. It's called amendments to the Constitution, but they take 2/3 of state legislatures, and it can happen, but it has to be. Most of the country has to want it, and it takes a very long process with very. You have to do a lot to change certain things of the government of the country. So that's it needs to be slow. That's how I view as conservative. Like that's my philosophy of the world, or the best way to deal with certain changes and basically in our government.
That's fair. And you talk about change, and obviously you do believe that change does have to happen, at least in some respect, again slowly. So what kind of change do you think is good change? Like, let's talk about modern day. Oh, well, we can go back to history too, because I know you're big on history. But what kind of big historical changes happened, back in the day, and maybe changes you think that should happen now?
That's actually a really good question. That's a very broad question. It's really putting me on the spot. I would have to say, like, I from the last podcast, I don't know if any of our 7 viewers, half from Russia, listened to Trolley's podcast. He made a good observation. Western society, he argued, and I would agree, doesn't start in Greek and Roman times. I mean, it has origins, but I would say in Europe, the Magna Carta was a great change. And from that, you're basically limiting power. You're starting to have a form of representation, government power being desegregated, and then that creates the philosopher, the works of guys like John Locke, who take that further, who use the Magna Carta as a catalyst for their ideas, and then you start having, like from those ideas, then goes into the American Revolution, which was probably the biggest change. And, the ideas of Adam Smith, the Invisible Hand, I trace it all to the Magna Carta. That's the biggest change. Recently, the biggest change for me, I would have to say maybe the 1980s of pushing back against the Keynesian model, where government power in a way replaces monarchy, and it desegregates the power back to the individual or back to counties, smaller governments, and city governments, etc. Counties. So yeah.
And Keynesianism now. That's my philosophy.
It's getting pushed back recently. I don't know what to make of the whole populist wave coming in, but it's not conservative.
Yeah, and I want to make a segue with that, because this whole idea of slow change over time, and I think that's going to be the basis of this video. But basically, what we have now is people on both sides of the aisle, people on the left, with the SJW crowd and a lot of these Bernie bros, and people on the right, this right-wing populism, who are both kind of seeking, in some ways or form, dramatic, quick change. And so, what are your thoughts on both of these groups? Let's start with the SJW left. Well, where do you think they have it wrong?
Oh, their philosophy in total. It sounds very cliche. History does repeat itself. They're trying to go back to the 1940s. They believe that the FDR New Deal, his New Deal, worked. That the Great Society worked. And now, as you know, as a libertarian, and I know, and I guess Charlie, not Dan, but as we know, it didn't work. It just it elongated the problem, and it just hindered the free market from bouncing back. But they see that this is one of the problems I had as a neoconservative that I realized maybe like 6 months later, well 6 months ago, that they see that they can change human nature. They can interact. They can protect society. They can make life better. But what they don't realize is that government is manned by people that are humans. We make mistakes. Central planning has failed, but they think that these people, the SJWs, they think they can, basically they know better than the rest. Like, look at this election. Those who voted for Donald Trump, they think are idiots, morons, etc.
And what's so ironic about these people on the left is that there's no doubt in my mind that most of their intentions are good.
Most of them are. Yeah.
And what's so awkward about it is that they want to censor people's speech. They want to limit what people can say, and they don't like hearing things that they disagree with, no matter what side it comes from.
Well, I guess I'm confusing SJWs with the socialists, but it's kind of the same thing. SJWs, I guess, with the freedom of speech, they see hate speech and like as such as hurting feelings, as they're trying to define racism, but humor is so made people to say things because they're funny. It's their right to say it, or controversial. Like, they're trying to categorize what's controversial and what's racist and what's hurtful. You can't do that in a free society, because then you're going to go into bookstore. You're going to go, how do you challenge people to think, to come learn, or to express themselves? So it's a very interesting. Like, I don't know how what standard are they using? And like, once you make a standard, you begin limiting things.
Exactly. So they want to do things on a broad basis, where it really should be up to the individual to decide, okay, does this offend me personally? This isn't objectively offensive, but maybe I see it personally as offensive.
And therefore, I should suppress their freedom of speech, or their views. And it's very scary, very dictatorial governments have done that in the past. And that's my fear of what the people say there's an alt-right, but there's an alt-left, and that is the SJWs. And
the alt-left's been here for I'm sure we would argue much longer than the alt-right has been. At least
the alt-right's relatively new. Like, I would say the alt-right began like 2015. I think I want to say it began with Donald Trump. I never heard. I could be wrong. Well, they had different factions.
Yeah, I've known a lot of They didn't call it alt-right back then.
Yeah, they didn't call it. In the mainstream, I think it came with Donald Trump. In that great meme war of 2016. But in a way, the alt-right is very similar. Anybody who disagrees with them, and this is my problem with Milo Yiannopoulos, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, who is a member of the alt-right, works for Breitbart. If anybody disagrees with them, they will skewer that person publicly. Even things that aren't even relative to the argument, they'll just attack them personally or try to suppress them. Like Ben Shapiro had to resign from Breitbart. Well, he resigned, but after that, he was personally attacked from many details that weren't relevant to his arguments against Donald Trump. And
which goes into the argument of, I guess, the difference between politically incorrect speech and hate speech. Do you think that there is a difference?
Yes, there is a difference. I think hate speech is basically due out of anger, with malice. Politically incorrect is just, saying things, with humor or just pointing things out. And, it also depends on what is considered politically incorrect in society. But if you don't do it if you do it without malice and it is obvious when somebody does it, it's pretty obvious when hate speech is hate speech. So that's my point. With done with malice and hate, then you realize that's the difference for me.
So I probably should have started with this question, but when did you start realizing that you yourself were a conservative? And I know and are you still a neo-conservative? Has that changed? And if it has, why?
I have always been conservative since I can remember, and that's probably due to my parents upbringing me with Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Michael Savage. I was a very religious person. I spent most of my life in Catholic schools. I think I participated in a mock election where I voted for George W. Bush in 2000 as a second grader. But I began to change. I evolved into a libertarian, possibly my junior year of high school. Because I realized that central planning doesn't work. I got introduced to the works of Ayn Rand, who was very instrumental in my philosophy of, basically she wrote that society is like, collectivism is bad when people group together and they dictate what a person should do or how should live, and etc. That the best society is a society of individuals who agree to work together for their own benefits. That there's no harm or loss against people, and that's when I started becoming a libertarian.
What's ironic about that is that both you and Charlie both got into libertarianism probably around the same time in your life, and have both edged away from it, and I would argue almost completely different. Well, yours is more linear direction. He steered away.
I'm more fiscally conservative. Well, more libertarian conservative. More, I guess, more basically, yeah, more like he believes that the government and the corporations should work together to benefit society. I disagree, because I see the individual as being higher than society in certain situations. But then we'll go back to that. I was never a pure libertarian. I always believed in intervention in foreign affairs. I supported the Iraq War and still do. And I believed, I got co-opted in a class many years ago, where a professor raised a question: if we can name two liberal democracies that ever went to war with each other. And a liberal democracy is one that has free elections, free media, and basically a stable government. And I couldn't think of any. And that's when it clicked in my head: no liberal democracy has ever gone to war against each other. And I believed, and I got into...
That's what paved the way for you becoming...
Paid me to a neoconservative. A neoconservative. I became...
What is a
neoconservative?
I don't know.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Neoconservatives were not always called neoconservatives. They've been around since the Woodrow Wilson era, Woodrow Wilson believed in the best. He had this grand utopia vision of changing the world into liberal democracies, where human rights were respected. There were elections. There was democracies everywhere, and after he died, that got his legacy lived on in a group of liberals, like basically Democrats, who saw that the best way for the world to like survive and to win the Cold War was to spread democracies. And eventually these guys, led by Irving Kristol, who was the father of Bill Kristol, who founded he founded the Weekly Standard, they moved into the Republican Party. And along with like other Republicans, along with some Democrats, Scoop Jackson, they were Cold War warriors. They fought the Cold War. They tried to intervene anywhere in the world. They intervened in South America. They intervened in the Middle East, and they believed to win the war was to spread democracies, and to make the world safer was to spread democracies. And then this carried on to the George W. Bush administration, as Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and others were also neoconservatives. And then in the Iraq War, they sought regime change, but did it awful. And then it carried on. It carried on to, I would say, Hillary Clinton, and some people would argue Obama is a neoconservative with Libya and other areas of support.
It's certainly been the policy for quite some time.
Yes, it's been the policy for the last 30 years, I would say. I started, after I realized that as a libertarian that some government programs were needed, such as Medicaid, Medicare, to provide for those to get off their feet, but limited. Education, certain public school education was needed, and the military was needed. And that's why I was never a pure libertarian. I believed eventually, as a conservative, as a traditional conservative does, true constitutional conservative, I'm going to go against Charlie here, that the government has to protect your well-being from foreign intruders and, provide you and take care of you when external events happen. And with the neoconservative, I thought the best way to combat terrorism was to change the Middle East into all the countries in the Middle East to democracies or republics.
Do you still think that's possible now? Is that still what you want?
Yes. I mean, if the world was perfect, I'd be a communist because, there's no such thing as a non-greedy human or a non-greedy government. But basically, what changed me was I had arguments with a bunch of guys. Germany and Japan, we changed, but we changed both those countries completely because we stayed there for 40 plus years. The American people, after Vietnam and after the Cold War, do not want to stay and fight long wars to change countries anymore. So some would say rightfully so.
This is actually an interesting argument because I've never heard you make this one to me before. So what you're saying is the actual issue is the reason why we were able to change Germany from their culture and Japan from their culture was because we stayed there for decades and basically we instilled it.
We basically wrote the Constitution of Japan. It's very similar to ours. It's very, very similar. Bill of Rights and etc. It's very similar. With Iraq, we messed up in the 80s. Well, not Iraq, Afghanistan. After we helped, defeat the Russians in Afghanistan, we didn't. There's a good movie called Charlie Wilson's War, and I read into the background. Mm-hmm. It shows where we went wrong when arming the Taliban and the Mujahideen. We didn't help rebuild. We just left after we helped win the destruction in the battles. I mean, it was a good cause, but we didn't place a structure to help those that were basically in ruins. So in that void, the Taliban came with the Mujahideen, and became Al Qaeda.
Is part of the reason because back in those times during World War II, America had a much more active role there than they did in, say, the Iraq War, with only sending maybe a couple of thousand troops at best?
No, our influence was still pretty strong. I mean, we still had strong ties with Saudi Arabia. I mean, we had strong ties with Egypt. It's just that I think we were still recovering from Vietnam, which, as many as you know, we were winning that war, but we just couldn't. The American public was against it, and we decided to pull out. We just decided to leave, and then what filled the void was basically the Taliban and the Mujahideen that became Al Qaeda, and it came to bite us in the ass for the next 20 years, like even today, from the 1980s on, next 30 years, we had a policy of just going in, destroying, and leaving, which hasn't worked. If you look at Libya, Iraq, and like those two are the best prime examples of what we've caused, which is because we just leave.
Right, because we leave a power vacuum there, and that power vacuum has to be filled by something.
Yes, and
different groups vie for that power, and that's the big issue.
And then I started realizing that regime change won't happen. I understand why we went into Iraq. I really, there were nuclear weapons, and it was shown, but they were moved and they were gone, and he was housing Al Qaeda cells. But Libya, I didn't understand. There was no threat to us. It was just a slaughter going on, which is sad, but we can't save the world. We don't have the resources. We don't have the capabilities to stay anymore. We don't want to. Right. The American public, the American liberals are pretty interesting. They cry about refugees, but they never want to do anything to stop it. And that's my biggest problem with those on the left. They don't want to get their hands dirty and sacrifice to protect those people, because when they do, they get angry. They get what has to be done, and they don't want to do it. And this is what happens. And this is why with Syria, I don't know why we would even get involved in arming, because now it's too late, and it's just not going to happen. And the culture, this goes back to the culture. There has never been a stable Arab democracy in the history of the Middle East.
Do you think that's because of the culture, or do you think it's just, well, we just haven't found the right time?
It's part of the culture. Also the history of it. The three most stable governments in the Middle East are not Arab. They're Persians, Iranians, Israelis, and the Turkish. Turkey was able to perform. I mean, it's not a liberal democracy, but it's a stable government. Iran is not liberal, it's stable. Then Israel is stable because they had a history prior. And Persia,
Turkey's more liberal than the other two at the very well. Turkey and
Israel is more liberal.
Israel is more liberal. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, this goes back to the redrawing of the lines after World War I, where we put different sects and ethnic groups in different countries. See, Iraq is run by a Shiite minority over a Sunni majority of the population, and that's why we have this problem.
And the real issue can be always brought back to Europeans back in the early 20th century. Yeah, the carving of Africa, the carving in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, this was after in the 20th century. We really would have to redraw the lines, but then that would require more fighting. And
a lot more fighting.
I think at this point we shouldn't do that, and that's where, as a neoconservative, I decided to step out. And also, a lot of neoconservatives see Russia as an enemy, but I think there is a way where we can work with Russia, and that's, I guess, what I agree with those on the alt-right and Trump supporters, that we shouldn't shun away from siding with Russia. Do they commit human rights violations? Yes, but so does Saudi Arabia, and we work with them in China.
That's true. So I want to make a jump now. We talked about war for a very long time. I think you got your point across. Very, very clear. Very, I understood what you were saying. So thank you. I don't want to interrupt you. I got so into it. So I want to talk a little bit about, this election cycle, not more so in the sense of the results. Obviously we know what happened. We've talked about it before, but where do conservatives go from here? Because Donald Trump ran on, he's not a conservative. I don't think any of us think he's a conservative.
So that's Charlie.
So this is, I think Charlie knows that too.
I hope so.
Not it's his, he different. But Yeah, so conservatives are. This is the first time we don't have a Republican conservative in power in probably a very
Since
long time.
Nixon.
Yes, in a very long time. So,
Yeah.
where do you go from here? Because you are not in the power right now, although
No,
some of the
no, no,
picks
not at
are.
all.
So,
A
go
lot of
ahead.
the picks are conservative.
Are you optimistic?
Oh,
Or are you just going to wait it out and see? Are you pessimistic? Go ahead.
I am optimistic. Let me just make a difference. There's a difference between Trolley's kind of conservative, which is
He doesn't call
very,
himself conservative.
yeah, no, he's not. I wouldn't even say conservative. He's very, I would say old school conservative, like the traditional. I'm a traditional
He's a
liberal. He's a traditional conservative.
Yes,
I'm a
he's a
traditional liberal.
traditional. Yeah, he's a
I
traditional.
believe in change. I believe in change. I see slow change as good. Charlie sees that eventually there comes a time where there should be no more change, and part of that's in Donald Trump. You have that with the anti-free trade. They want to slow down change as much as they can. Free trade. They want to
Mhm.
stop any kind of changes to their system, any kind of alterations or tweaks. I am more optimistic than all Democrats. A lot of his choices are
That's
good.
true.
I really I do like Mattis. His people on the advisories, Wilbert Ross, or I forgot the other
Carson.
guy's name. Not oh boy, something to protest that.
Yeah.
But I do like his economic advisors. I do like Mattis. I don't know much about his treasurer secretary, but I do. So far, I haven't seen
Mhm.
nothing bad about the guy. I I do like his secretary of education a lot. I do believe in school choice and charter schools. I am just worried. Where is how is he going to deal with domestic problems? Foreign policy, I'm not worried about because I'm starting to share the realist view that he has, the pragmatic view. I'm just hoping he
Right.
doesn't get outsmarted by Putin, but he surrounded himself with some very educated, intelligent people.
Regarding the domestic, it seems like at this point it's very open ended where what direction he's going to go. He said very contrary things during this election cycle about many domestic policies.
Oh no, yeah. We're 20 trillion in debt, and he has said that he can wipe out the debt in the first 3 years of his term, and that's impossible. Because he wants to expand the military with tax cuts. He's not going to cut into. I don't know what he's going to do with Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. I know he wants to repeal Obamacare, but he has been on the record saying he believes in universal health care.
Right.
So this is where we are. He is. I would don't
So
even. I consider
what can
I
you
understand.
what can you do right now, basically? So like
Well,
what if he does do
yeah.
these maybe leftish policies? What's something that you would do?
Well, let me finish. He's more of a Democrat than anything domestically, possibly on the same level as Obama.
Right.
Besides Obamacare, what conservatives can do and libertarians who disagree with him fiscally is keep challenging it, keep writing, keep supporting senators such as Rand Paul. I can't believe I just said that.
Woo,
Marco
woo, woo, woo.
Rubio,
Boo, boo, boo,
um,
boo.
even John McCain, and Lindsey Graham, who are two neoconservatives, but question, we have to investigate the hacking, or we can't make sure Russia can do this again. We have to look at Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, and we have to challenge him on many things that go against our Constitution and the all right.
So
I
basically, the real solution here is just more voices in the conversation,
Yeah, this
right?
is nobody really challenged in the Democrats Obama for the last 8 years. Trump's not going to have that luxury. Rand Paul has already threatened to fight him over the Secretary of State if he chose John Bolton and other. I mean, and he didn't. But Republicans are willing right now to fight him,
Right.
which I don't see his downfall being fighting with Democrats, but he could potentially self-destruct fighting with Republicans. So this is where things can get very intense. But as a conservative, I am not going to stop questioning Republicans. I've always questioned the alt-right. And, I debated Charlie on here. I lost a lot of Trump supporters on Facebook. what conservatives can do is subscribe to National Review, subscribe to Cato, Reason,
Subscribe to Political Spectrum podcast down below.
Political Spectrum, and donate and read and participate and like question. Call up your congressman. Like, if your congressman is conservative, Republican, is this really part of our principles? This is what we stand for.
Calling out people regardless of party on things that they do.
Yeah. And the Republican Party is better at doing that than the Democrats. I'm a little biased in that, but we are. We very are. I don't remember any Democrats questioning Obama's Libya, the bombing of Libya, besides maybe one senator from Ohio. I forgot his name, but
it certainly was very rare. But I think we should end it here. Do you have any closing remarks you want to make? I guess we already talked about the future, but you're good to go? Because I guess that kind of was the final question, huh?
I am very good to go. I recommend people to read Friedrich von Hayek, read The Fountainhead, and read Edmund Burke.
All right, guys, this has been...
And that's what a conservative is. Thank you.
All right, guys, this has been Frank. He is our conservative on our podcast. I hope this allowed you to see more into where he thinks about things, basically. So please like, comment, and subscribe down below if you're not already. To our 12 viewers who made it this far, 5 viewers, 10, however many of you did.
Hey.
Thank you. We're going to do another video on Sunday, and then we'll do Danny next week. So until next time, guys, peace.
Adios.